Mehrdad Marty Yousafzai, who is an Iranian-American political strategist. He was a senior counselor to Reza Pahlavi. He was a former partner of Ed Rollins, one of the senior political strategists under Ronald Reagan. And he is a JCPA fellow as of this year. We're very honored to have him. He's our first Iranian American fellow, and steeped deeply in everything political, diplomatic, and strategic regarding the Iranian regime. And he will be joining Maurice and myself in really understanding how the Iranian regime, in its war, what we call the chess war that it has been prosecuting since 1979, and is very much behind the Hamas massacre of October the 7th and what currently is transpiring over our northern border. So we'll be delighted in just a couple of minutes to have Mehrdad Yousafzai with us on the program. If there's anyone guest on the program that we can be very confident will not whitewash the Iranian regime, it is Mehrdad Marty Yousafzai, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Marty, it's really an honor to have you on the program this morning where you are. Welcome.
Well, good morning from my side, and good afternoon to you. Thank you for having me today, Dan.
Thank you for joining us, Marty. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have seen you recently in the United States, and now to have you with us from the United States. I know you've been for many decades deeply involved in mobilizing the forces of freedom in the Iranian community, both within the country and outside in the Iranian diaspora. Help us understand, Marty, the depth of the involvement of the Iranian regime in everything going on in the Middle East today, which, as we know, on October 7th took a very severe turn towards massacre, mass murder, genocidal anti-Semitism, and the Iranian regime sort of it keeps itself, as it likes, as it has for the last 44 years, in the shadows, mobilizing marionettes such as, with blood on their hands, such as the Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and others.
Well, as you accurately said earlier on at the beginning of the program, there's no question, absolutely none, that the Iranian regime has been the chief instigator of this entire catastrophe. It has been no secret, certainly not according to what Hamas and Hezbollah themselves have said over the years, certainly not according to what the various members of the Iranian regime have said over the years. They, meaning the Iranian Islamist regime, has been the chief funder, the chief supplier, and the chief ideological leader for this, what we refer to as this spirit of militancy that is driving these proxy organizations, whether it be Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, or across the region. Ironically enough, we have here an Islamist, non-Arab Shia regime, an Islamist, non-Arab Shia regime that has embraced singularly the Palestinian cause to level extremist approach that no other Arab state has subscribed in the past 2 decades, 3 decades. We just saw the conclusion of the Islamic conference in Saudi Arabia, and the world witnessed that its statement was less than warm in terms of endorsing the ideology that Iran was pushing there. So we have here Iran that is standing apart from the entire region, pushing this militancy. And yes, as people have said before, and as you said, the head of the snake is in Tehran, sadly so. But those are the facts.
Mehrdad, what is the Iranian grand strategy here? If we zoom out, or take a rocket ship up to, several 100,000 feet above the earth and take a look at the the grand strategy, we see a very typical Iranian regime strategy of mobilizing these forces, of directing, funding, supplying the Hamas with the means, the sophistication of technology and strategy and funding in order to have pulled off this genocidal massacre, knowing full well in Tehran that Israel would respond forcefully, and then that would trigger, in their view, perhaps a regional war. Would it not? Is this? How are you seeing the Iranian grand strategy at work here?
Yeah, well, since its inception, the Iranian Islamist regime has always utilized the proxies in order to manage this low intensity regional and international war that it has taken on with imperial West. It has been careful always never to directly confront. It experienced the 8-year war with Iraq, so it knows the horrors of that. So the regime has always relied on its proxies to leverage and demand and conceptually a blackmail approach with the region and the world. So that is the genesis, the root of its relationship with these various organizations. And it mattered very, very little if they are Sunni, if they are Shia, if they are ISIS, if they are Al-Qaeda, whenever and wherever the regime has collaborated, supported, funded, directed, and allowed free transport through its territory to these organizations. But the 35,000-mile picture that you asked for, in our view, this war conducted by Hamas now, whether it was actually at the command of Tehran at that moment or not, that can be debated, but it had a number of specific goals. One, very clearly, it stopped the peace process within the region. Goal was to slow down and possibly reverse the Abraham Accords, and specifically, the challenge of a peace accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel would have been seen as catastrophic for Iran's role in the region. So this war clearly put a pause on all of that. Secondly, it was to, frankly, in its view, it was to humiliate Israel, to sort of take away from the sheen and the prowess and untouchable status in terms of military power of Israel. The surprise attack was a humiliation in terms of intelligence and not being able to stop something like that in terms of the Iranian regime's view. And thirdly, most importantly, what this attack has done in the eyes of the regime, is that it has been an opportunity for it to fortify or shore up its domestic vulnerability. By that, I mean some of the rumblings that we have seen in recent months, certainly last year, within the Iranian streets, the people, massive uprisings, which they have suppressed, and two, some of the rumblings that they've had within the ranks of the regime itself, whether it be the reformists or on the opposite end, the more radical, conservative, more militant elements. So the regime has sought to benefit from this war by addressing those 3 points.
Interestingly, Mehrdad, the instability within Iran has not decreased. It may be that the Iranian regime has succeeded to distract the domestic issue for the moment, which has been a key strategy of lighting up different parts of this bloody chessboard when it feels that it is under domestic duress and even threat. But we see videos coming out of Iran in which the Iranian people are actually cursing the Palestinians. You hear it in Persian, and by extension, condemning the regime.
Absolutely correct. That's the exact point of opportunity here. Dan, you're correct. despite of conventional wisdom might be wrongly in the West, the Iranian people do not have the deeply felt sentiments towards the Palestinian cause that the regime projects. And this is primarily because of a number of reasons. The Iranian people did witness the arrival of Ayatollah Khomeini and the regime, largely supported and delivered at the hands of Yasser Arafat and the militant elements of the PLO at the time. The first person who visited Iran 6 days or 5 days after the revolution, embracing and kissing Ayatollah Khomeini, was none other than Yasser Arafat. So 40 years later, Iranian people look back and see the role the Palestinians played. Fast forward 2 years, 3 years later, Iran-Iraq war. During that war, the Iranian people witnessed the same Palestinian leaders, Yasser Arafat and his type, were squarely on the side of Saddam Hussein in that brutal 8-year war that Iran had with Saddam Hussein, chemical warfare, killing and maiming of at least 1 million Iranians. So this was a second unfolding part of the experience Iranian people have had with the Palestinian cause. Fast forward today, past 20 years, we have Iranian children, little boys and little girls, who have to, in a very, very wealthy country, they have to scavenge and search through garbage pits, sleep on cardboard at night, 6-year-old, 7-year-old boys and girls. Why? Because billions that should be spent on those kids are being siphoned off and sent to support, quote unquote, Palestinian causes. And mind you, not only Palestinian cause, but the most violent, the most vile, the most venomous and vicious side and elements of the Palestinian leadership. So when it comes to the Iranian people, the Iranian streets, there is no love lost. And the position of the Iranian people is I and the Iranian people first, and then others in the region.
To what extent, Mehrdad, if I could just jump in, to what extent do you see the use by the Iranian regime really of the Palestinian people as cannon fodder? They are providing these terrorist groups with arms, with funding, with training, and then sending them off to kill Israelis in anticipation, in clear understanding that Israel will respond. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians will be killed simply as a means to achieve their goal of, as you described it previously, undermining the efforts for regional peace, and at the same time, complete disregard for Palestinian lives. So when they say that they are supporting Palestinian causes, in truth, they're not supporting Palestinian causes. What they're supporting is violence and terrorism, and the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian people, are merely cannon fodder, and that can be disposed of at any given time.
Well, sadly, the regime's concern for life was proven again in the 8-year war with Saddam Hussein, when there was a moment when the Iranian forces pushed back an invading army of Saddam, and at that moment Saddam offered to sue for peace and pay significant war damages. Ayatollah said no, and instead sent waves, I mean, this is all documented, waves and waves of tens of thousands of underage children, waves of them, towards the Iraqi army to walk through and march through those mindset fields to clear for an assault on Iraqi land. So the Iranian regime has proven that it does not care. It has very little value for life. If it did not care for life of Iranian people, you can deduce from that how it feels about what you referenced as using Palestinians as cannon fodder. Again, the role and the mission of the Iranian regime has been to stir the pot, to raise the temperature, to use proxy groups to leverage the region to demand blackmail and command respect from the various governments in the region and Europe and ultimately the United States, because it promises, if you do not give in to me, it is these elements that I will unleash.
There's something, Mehrdad, about the United States-led Western alliance that apparently deeply misunderstands the Iranian regime issue. The current administration, the Biden administration, has offered $6 billion into the Iranian regime, which clearly has gone fungibly to the Hamas, to Hezbollah. We noticed in this particular genocide for the 24 to 36 hours that it took place, October 7th to October 8th, the level of sophistication and modernity of the weaponry that Hamas had, in addition to many reports of Farsi, of Persian language, being spoken among some of the participants in the mass murder. What is it in the Western alliance that they simply seem to misunderstand about the Iranian regime?
Well, as we discussed earlier, it's been the regime's approach. Again, it's a blackmail relationship whereby I take hostages. Remember, this happened right at the birth of the regime, 444 days hostage of American diplomats. So it learned early on the value of human assets. We saw this through it securing $6 billion for release of 6 people, 2 of them being personal friends of mine. And then we have learned recently that the Ayatollah Khamenei has just this past week issued an order to release upwards of $100 million to some of these groups. So where is this cash coming from under a cash-strapped regime? This cash is coming from the $6 billion that was released earlier on. So this has been the playbook of the regime to use the threat of worse consequences if the region does not give in. And the driving reasoning behind the West's desire to negotiate is because the regime has been very, very effective in presenting 2 faces to the world. One, we've had people like Javad Zarif, very articulate, Western educated, in fact, Denver and New York educated former foreign minister who comes and speaks in the language of diplomacy. Then you have the other face that they play. Hey, listen, we have the good guys like Zarif, talk with us, because if not, we have the bad guys like you name them, that you got to deal with them. So the West has been sold this bill of goods by the Iranian regime that, listen, we have a set and subset of statesmen within our regime that can either be rational or irrational. You make the choice. Mm-hmm. And they present the Javad Zarif machine of diplomacy. Well, the news is that's all a game of kabuki. It's theater. It's all the same. The regime does not have 2 sides of the coin. It's all the same coin. It's all one face. The coin has one face. And sadly, we've come to learn that the net result, the goal of the regime, is driven into wreaking havoc. So I think the world is concluding that no matter what the dynamics are, as long as the Iranian regime is in power, it is going to be variations of the same. And therein lies the opportunity exactly at this moment in history, because history has plenty of examples whereby important military and political setbacks have led to the unraveling of ruling governments and regimes. We've seen this. Good examples are, I think, Kaptur, when Milosevic had its defeat. The Kaptur movement initiated an led to the unraveling and collapse of that regime. We saw it after the Falklands when that regime collapsed. In fact, in Iran, we have right after World War I, when the triple invasion of Iran, known as Persia at the time, by Russia, Tsarist Russia, England, United Kingdom, and the Ottoman Empire, led to the collapse of the Qajar monarchy in Iran, and in fact, the rise of Reza Shah I. So what I'm trying to get to is that this catastrophe in Hamas presents an opportunity whereby the regime has found itself in a lose-lose situation. If it engages, it is destined to be crushed because it will not be able to take on Israel and the United States, no matter its huff and puff. And if it does not engage, which it has signaled through Hezbollah and Nasrallah that does not intend to engage, it's also a lose-lose for it because domestically it is losing control of its ranks within its own regime, IRGC and the professional armed forces, complaining as to the danger the regime has placed Iran and with its own people, where you cited yourself the slogans we have seen throughout the Iranian streets, basically saying, not Hamas, not Lebanon, we give our life for Iran. Or the chants the world saw at the Stalker Stadium, where they told the officials in the stadium to shove up the Palestinian flag, you know where. So I think there's an opportunity here for the regime to really be challenged through its own action.
The question that goes on from that is, how do we make that strategic change and get to the end point of this war where both Iran loses on the military front, both using its proxy Hamas, and on the other hand, also suffers possibly a diplomatic downfall where we could possibly extend out the Abraham Accords and also bring in Saudi Arabia into their agreements, as was almost being discussed just weeks prior to the start of the massacre. I think that has to be part of that strategic effort by all the different regional players who see Iran as a regional threat and as someone who is really culturing this instability around the region. How do you think that can play out? Do you think that is a possibility as well?
No, that's actually an excellent point of inquiry. As I said, this actually provides a perfect storm and an opportunity whereby both a military defeat, albeit via its proxy, as well as diplomatic defeat can be achieved. There is no question Israel will invariably address the Gaza issue. It will unfortunately and sadly cause and have a high human toll, which is regretfully a byproduct of war. No one desires that. But there's no question, I believe, that Israel will address let's call it the cleanup operation of Gaza and the expunsion of the Hamas leadership and hopefully that militant ideology. So that's issue number one. Israel must be able to effectively, with minimum cost, address the Hamas ideology. So that's a military defeat right there. Diplomatically, we look at indicators. Former Foreign Minister Anwar Gargash of the United Arab Emirates just a few days ago offered a conversation in a conference in Abu Dhabi in which he mentioned that while this human toll is unacceptable to the region in terms of the Palestinian question, but he also added that the region must not put its agenda, its regular agenda of expansion and peace and trade and commerce on hold. Meaning what? Meaning that as soon as this tension, this crisis is over, what had begun previously, meaning trade and commerce rooted in peace with Israel and within the region, must go forward. So this is a direct signal that the diplomatic side of the Iranian regime has no ground, has no audience, has no support within the Arab world. Read the statement issued by the Islamic Conference. It was not a glaring endorsement of the political vision of the Islamic Republic. It basically suggests moving onward, and I believe recommending that the ultimate solution is a two-state solution. But the way your question was, how this opportunity can be accelerated, is actually ensuring that the Iranian regime does not have a ideological perch to sit on, does not have the ability to supply and support its proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. And unfortunately, it means taking on the regime wherever its strategic channels are, shutting them down, and frankly, supporting the Iranian people in their desire, in their quest to rid themselves of the regime.
Marty, we're going to take questions. We just remind our friends and colleagues from abroad to write in your questions in the chat, in the chat box, as opposed to raising your hand, because we have too many participants in order to start taking live voice questions. So if you can state your questions, we will repeat the question and then ask Mehrdad to address the question. Marty, what we're seeing here looks like a runway to an ultimate confrontation with the regime. The level of instability in the Middle East right now that we see from Jerusalem, from where we are discussing with you these issues right this moment, is rather extraordinary, in the sense that we have a front in the south opposite Hamas, and an evolving front in the north. The possibility of, there are great tensions in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the former West Bank of Jordan. And then, and at this point, I think optimistically, as a point of difference, a recent poll within the Israeli Arab community was just published yesterday that indicated, and I would say happily, that many of this representative sample of Israeli Arabs identify as Israelis with the destiny of the Israeli people, the nation say the Jewish people, but Israeli Arabs appear, according to this latest sample, to be identifying with Israel, notwithstanding the fact that we're looking potentially at a forefront war. And it looks like this may be a runway with all of these American military assets right in our neighborhood for an ultimate confrontation with the regime.
Yeah, I think if one were to wager here, I think the chances are very, very small that the regime will willingly directly engage Israel and the United States. It's a simple matter of military math. The regime, despite its huff and puff, does not have the standing to take on the greatest military might on earth, being the United States, and certainly Israel's military capability, especially if this becomes a formal war. Now, proxy war and low-intensity war is a different matter. The Iranian regime has mastered that. The classic guerrilla warfare is different than full-scale war. So I don't think the chances are high that the regime will engage officially the United States and Israel, and therein lies its challenge. Because, as we are hearing, past week and 10 days, members of the regime itself, from the IRGC and a number of commanders, have started rumbling about how we, meaning the regime, are nothing but a plastic tiger. Mind you, not paper tiger, plastic tiger. So therein lies the fissures. If it does not engage, the regime stands the challenge of disappointing its own extremists. If it does engage, it stands a certain crushing defeat. And this is where we suggest there is a lose-lose scenario here for the regime, whereby if correct strategy is choreographed here, I think a lot of damage can be brought to the stability of a regime.
So one of the questions that we're being asked, Mehrdad, is exactly possibly what you touched on now. Given that there are even more fanatics in the Iranian regime than its current leaders, who would be the replacement for this regime were it to be toppled? Would it be the more fanatical elements of the Iranian regime, or would it be, is there a possibility that it could be entirely replaced with the previous regime, with a more accommodable regime for the rest of the world and for world peace?
I think a good reflection of where the future of Iran stands, whether it be a month from now or a year or 10 years from now, I think the perfect mirror is what the world saw during the Mahsa revolution. The Iranian people are a progressive, well-educated, Western-centric, highly cultured, sophisticated people. The Iranian people spoke to the world through Mahsa Amini that the regime does not represent it. The values of the Iranian street are in direct conflict with the values of the regime. And thus, I am confident to tell you, whatever replaces this regime will not be a more militant version of it, though that is in fact exactly what the regime warns in its private diplomacy, telling the West, telling London, Paris, and Washington that, guys, if you don't like us, just imagine some of these thugs that we showcase every now and then. But the Iranian people, 90 million people, are not going to stand for that, and they will ultimately produce something that is more representative of their quest. Don't forget, Iran had the region's first constitutional revolution over 100 years ago. Iran had the women's right to vote, suffrage, before Switzerland did. Iran is not accurately seen as it should be. It is a deeply cultured, a deeply thoughtful, sophisticated, educated population, not Arab. And it sees, the Iranian people see themselves, they have a vision for themselves that is absolutely an aberration of what we have in Tehran today. So we do not worry what is to replace it. Now, will elements representing the previous regime be able to return or not? That's up for the Iranian people to determine. But certainly what we have seen is that the regime's record as compared to that of the previous regime is one of a dark, deeply, deeply soiled record in any category: human rights, corruption, civility towards its people. There is no comparison between what the Iranian regime has done and what the Iranian people experienced prior to this regime. They compare it between a golden era and the dark ages. So,
Marty, this has been a really engaging discussion. I think what you're reminding us is that we need to keep our eyes focused on the Iranian regime, even at the same time that Iran is trying to focus our eyes on Gaza and on Lebanon, all of which it would sacrifice in a minute in order to keep itself in power and viable. And this becomes the challenge of the West, which very much is driven by the immediacy of television images, the immediacy of acute fighting between sides, and trying to while Iran tries to keep itself in this ongoing shadow war, when in fact it is front and center, and the spotlight should be continually shining on the Iranian regime until it is no longer in the middle of what is causing all of this subversion, death, and destruction in the Middle East. So thank you ever so much for joining us. Your comments in this program will be available on the JCPA website. We would be deeply grateful for anyone's sponsorship of this program. JLTV is a major sponsor now of this program, and those who are on the JLTV network will receive this program as Frontline Israel, fighting Hamas, Hezbollah, the global jihad, and of course we'll mention Iran, the Iranian regime, in the middle of that entire jihad. So, Marty, if any have any parting thoughts, we'd be delighted to hear, and we thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for your friendship, attention to this important issue, the Iranian issue. I think just to conclude, the punchline is that the world has been for years past at a loss between what to do. They see an Iranian regime, an evil they've known, and they have been challenged by the fact that they cannot identify a viable, tangible, visible, evident alternative to this regime. That is understandable. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at catastrophes like we have seen in the past 38 days with the attack of Hamas, I think the world must conclude that if you look at the Iranian people, there's a point beyond which you need to have faith in the people themselves to produce the alternative, and for the world not to worry about what might come next. Our leaders, the next leaders of Iran, are in Iran today, young, educated, energetic, selfless, visionary. They want to be part of the world. And once the Iranian regime goes, the world has very, very little to worry about. So the appeal here is trust the Iranian people, support the Iranian people, and they will take care of the Iranian regime themselves.
Wonderful. Mehrdad Marty Yousafzai from Washington, D.C., thanks so much for joining us on Frontline Israel today. We'll look forward to seeing you real soon.
Thank you very much.